Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Future Supply Chain Podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar, and rejoining us today after many, many years is my good friend, Earnest Sweat, GP at Public School Ventures, and has very recently unveiled his new firm that he's here to open up and share a bit about. Over to you, Earnest.
Thanks, Santosh. Glad to be welcomed back. Hopefully I didn't do too poorly, and that's why it's been so long. But glad to be back on the pod. You're such a pro. But yes, I just unveiled for my newsletter, which consists of about 1,100 VCs, LPs, and operators who've been following me for 16 months now. And the name of the firm actually came from my own podcast, Swimming with Allocators, from a conversation there. And so briefly, let me take you through the story, and then I'll unveil the name. But our guest there, Sarah Samuels from NEPC, was talking about the need for a generation of investors to really kind of have resilience, just like founders, we need them to have resilience. And she talked about this concept in nature, which it was about something for trees. And when I first heard it, I was like, not another tree analogy within our industry. I was like, I can't do it. But as she spoke more about it, I was like sucked in. And so I don't know if you know this, but there's a certain type of bark and wood that is created through the natural stressors that trees face, whether it's wind, rain, sleet, whatever it might be. And that type of wood is key for a tree to actually be able to grow and sustain its weight, no matter how big it gets. And she juxtaposed it to this crazy late 80s experiment called Biosphere 2, which was in Arizona. And there was this huge dome, kind of biodome created that was for trees, vegetation, and really see if we have the perfect environment with no stressors, what will happen. And so what happened was trees just shot up because they weren't facing wind, rain, and all these stressors. But they didn't have this certain type of wood that was created. And so what they found was trees just falling over on their own weight.
Wow.
And so as this is happening, and I'm supposed to be focusing on the podcast, I'm just quickly Googling and seeing if anybody's used this name. But the other things that resonated for me were, one, that's just exactly what we went through with the no interest rate period, right? We had companies growing at all costs, not thinking about how to be resilient, how to be have discernment to pick the right times to grow, so we can actually create great public companies and not just become public. How do we become great acquisitions that can help another company and not just like cash out? And the other thing is, it was a personal kind of like, it resonated with me personally, because when you think of all the ups, downs, quick wins, times you get overwhelmed and setbacks, what is that for, right? And so the name of that concept or that type of wood is called Stresswood. And so that's the name of the firm that I'm building for Vintage 2027. And we can get into like why in a very earnest way would you announce something 2 years from now? But that's what I'm working towards for today, tomorrow, for the next 30 years.
I love that. And so for context, you were last on episode 25. We are over 200 episodes in today.
Wow.
And so your kind of introduction and presentation of Stresswood's amazing. But remind the folks as to kind of where you've come from, right? What all has led up to you saying, hey, I'm building my new firm and this is going to be my legacy and the rest of my life's work?
Yeah. So what caused some Stresswood in my own life? So back in episode 25, which is funny. I know we were supposed to meet in person for that, and I had to actually save a colleague's life, but that's a whole nother story for a different podcast.
That's right.
But I started my venture journey in 2014, 2015. And this was after business school. I just moved to the Bay Area, and I'd done one venture internship in my life prior during business school, where I lived in New Delhi, India, traveling all over India, working for an education technology and future of work firm. And so I always knew it would be something that I wanted to do. But once I moved to the Bay Area, I was like, I have to do this. And I wanted to drop everything. And so at the time when I did the first podcast, first appearance here, I was maybe 2 years in at Prologis and helped them build out their first corporate venture practice. And so what I got from that experience was, one, I realized that I'm really good at building within a platform or even outside what I'm doing now. But the main thing I'm really good at is finding white space. And so given kind of the ingredients to the gumbo of Prologis, huge public company with a brand of excellence within supply chain and real estate, I was like, where's the opportunity for them to actually add value? And so what we kind of zeroed in to was like this intersection between commerce, transportation, retail, some real estate, and logistics. And I left that experience with really three major food groups of product types that I got good at. That was vertical software, applied AI, and B2B marketplaces. And so then I took that experience to build on another platform, Great Point Ventures, which is a established firm in the Bay Area that's focused on early stage investing. At the time, I was focused on just Series A and Series B lead checks. And there, I really got to expand those product types to all different industries. And so, as you know, without getting too much into the kind of insider baseball, what's led me to this point now is seeing, having the early playoff wins and losses of doing over, I believe at this point, probably 30 deals, both personally and at firms, understanding what I'm really good at, which is those three product types and the Series A stage. If I did a postmortem of my, careers thus far, my best deals and the deals I regret not doing the most have always been Series A. And then seeing kind of like, what's my right to be a fund manager? So since leaving Great Point in mid 2023, everything I've been working on is like, how do I have the right to be a fund manager? And this kind of goes into like why Earnest waiting to 2027. The way my mind works and the way I approach things like wholeheartedly is being intentional, not out of a fear. It's like, I'm trying to win this and win at the highest level. So thinking about what I believe, what I'm good at, and also having experiments to test out, that's what I've been doing over these past 2 years.
Amazing. And so you mentioned when we started, you host your own podcast, Swimming with Allocators. And I'd be curious, you've had now the great fortune of interfacing with dozens, scores of different VCs, but also allocators, highly sophisticated institutional grade allocators. And I'd be curious, like, what have you learned or come to observe that might have matured how you think about investing in our space? And when I say space or our space, I'm thinking about, industrial, supply chain, mobility, the intersections they might have with e-com enablement, fintech, insurtech, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But would be curious kind of how you reflect on that and kind of walk away with, this might be how I further mature or evolve my practice and my craft.
Yeah, I think the headline that after now we've recorded, I don't know, probably like 58 conversations with allocators, released about, I think, 51. Ultimately, it's still a people business, right? And so And this is my whole thesis. Even I think on the rundown we have, and we're obligated as VCs to talk about AI. So as we have more automation, I think those who win in every function of life are those that are able to convey points to people in person, and are able to influence people and take them on a journey of whatever their story is to get things done. And so, although that's going to make it leave a crack of a door open for sociopaths, people need to have discernment. It's going to be importance of discernment as well. But to be successful in whatever you're doing, you're going to have to be able to connect with people and influence people and be able to tell stories. And so what that takes in kind of how that fits within kind of investing in our space, is you see mobility, you see, e-commerce enablement, you see transportation logistics as an opportunity. How are you conveying that? How are you showing that you believe that? And how does your background and story, how does it weave so well into that macro from a micro perspective that shows you're going to find that white space and win? You're going to find the best founder in that space and win. Because this is the thing that I've learned from talking to allocators and whatnot. The best companies, no matter what niche they're in, are found by all of the best investors. So how will you have the right to win it?
So I'm going to kind of continue leaning in there because I want to pull that thread on. Remember, like ultimately, regardless of what we're doing, regardless of where AI is taking us, there's still a human centricity around this stuff. And being able to persuade is something that's important that we need to continue to grow and develop. The one thing over the years that's driven me absolutely batshit crazy is the most sophisticated allocators don't appreciate or understand how large the breadth of supply chain is when we show up. We could spoon feed it as well.
Yeah.
And from the experience you had swimming with allocators, how would you describe the breadth, but also the importance of this global opportunity? And we actually, when we signed on to do this, one of your first questions was, hey, how's the new administration treating you as a supply chain person?
Yeah.
And so like, there's just mass, like, I think secular shifts going on, and people just may not quite understand or maybe even appreciate that depending on the vantage point they're sitting from.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be the disciple spreading the gospel. And we're in the business of, as venture capitalists, of selling ideas. That's what we're doing. And so not everybody is going to, a great salesman understands not everybody is going to buy what they're selling and be okay with it. It goes back to that resilience that you need to have and be good enough to understand, okay, who are my ICPs, right? And how can I be able to like convey this? And so it's really taking it and flipping it in your head of like, it's actually an advantage if most people don't, outwardly see it. Because when you see it, it's right before it does become mainstream, you'll be able to like hit it big. And so I'm not really answering a question, I don't think, of like, how to do it. But I think it's about commitment, and we're in a get rich slow game. Continue to make those bets because we're already seeing it. Like, I don't know if you feel this way too, Santosh, but I remember when I got laughed at. I won't name which firm. It's probably easy to tell because I've already given my buyout. On pitching why we need to focus on vertical software, and the fact that I was basically kind of laughed at it, that's too small, is laughable now.
Yeah,
because
I've been laughed out of many rooms trying to raise a supply chain fund. Stresswood, I guess, is what I've learned today.
Exactly. You just build in Stresswood. So I think, you have to keep at it, and it's only about having your people believe it, and there'll be more. And, once you hit that level of like, Midas list And people were like, oh yeah, we wanted to get in. You just never reached out to us. And you're like, actually, I have many emails that you never answered of mine. But you just have to keep at it. And because this is the journey.
We both spend the lion's share of our careers around supply chain related topics. You have much more breadth than I do, as you mentioned, but you specifically have focused and built your craft around the Series A stage.
Yeah.
You mentioned AI. I cannot have a podcast in this day and age with another investor without talking about AI. But I want to talk about the non-AI companies for a moment.
Yeah.
What's happening there? What is a good Series A for them? Is there such thing as we look ahead as a technology company that is non-AI? Because I also am kind of chewing on that and questioning kind of that as a more existential topic, which might sound weird and fad chasing, but that's the way the world feels right now.
Well, to that latter point, before I get into the like non-AI companies and their opportunities, that latter point, I think, yeah, AI is going to be ubiquitous. And as we think about the other, technological shifts that we've had, even in our own lifetime, of going from PC to then mobile to cloud, there were cloud companies. There now it's just like everything's is in the cloud, like for the most part. And so we're going to have the same shift happen in AI. And so, which, as we're taping this, we're just kind of like right after the, right after the DeepSeek news. The reason I chuckle is because honestly, I was trying to think what this was similar as of the timing of announcements on things, right? Because we had the Stargate announcement, right?
Yep.
And then right after was DeepSeek. It really felt on some like Kendrick and Drake shit, like on like when timing. I was like, it was perfectly timed. Of like, oh, you guys announcing that? It took us $20 to do this model. So anyway, I think it's gonna like it really begs the question, all this stuff happening on like what is a true moat? And sorry to belabor a point, but I think with so much automation, even for companies, it's going to be so critical on if you can have an advantage of distribution, right?
Yep.
How to get to customers, why. And that's why I'll plug, starting my venture career in supply chain, one of the hardest and most complex kind of like, competitor, frenemy kind of like landscapes really helped me, really showed me like, actually, this is how the business world works. And tech is more like that than anything else. And so being able to understand what is your true advantage, which needs to be as technology gets better and better every year, every second, what's your distribution? And so that's actually what I try to lean in as a partner for my companies. Now to your first part of your question, with like non-AI companies, what I've seen is, and I wrote about this a couple months ago, is just like, we went from like gold rush, like everybody could get money, to now Goldilocks, where it's like, you're too short, too tall, too hot, too cold. And it's really preventing there to be a market for companies. And so what are we seeing? You're like, oh, Ernest, there's still deals being done in non-AI companies. And I would argue that's because we need investors to actually have conviction in what they invest in and what they're looking for. And I think that's at a micro level. At a macro level, you can tell I'm like you. I'm like I'm like a historian and follower on venture. The other thing we got going on is like the industry's changing from how firms are constructed. And so we got firms getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Scope creep, where we got established blue chip firms who their early stage team only used to focus on Series A. They're now competing with YC and then all the way competing with hedge funds on publics, right? Then you have like a cottage industry of smaller funds that are focused on niche, and especially those that are in pre-seed and seed. It's extremely competitive, right? I believe one of my friends, I think she came up with this research, although I don't think she gets the credit. Robbie, who started her own fund now,
Yeah.
it's I believe no seed fund has more than 3% of all unicorn, like something like that. And so that just shows how fragmented it is.
Yeah.
And so what you have is cottage industry. Hey, what is venture backable and a venture exit for us is drastically different from these multi-stage funds, where I've heard stories of friends who are managing partners or GPs say, yeah, I mean, it's great. It has 10 million ARR, great, good margins, cool. Doesn't look like it can get to 5 billion exit today. And I'm like, well, what the fuck does? And so if you're telling me where, like, and not to make this about me, but where I see the opportunity, again, me looking at the micro, macro, and then where's the white space, is there's a need, and we start to see more of right-sized Series A firms. That if you're saying that it's not venture backable, top tier firms that are multi-stage, if you've always said like a $500 million exit is not appeasing. But if you're saying all the way to 4.9999 billion is also not, that means there's a huge opportunity for other firms. And so we're just seeing all that play out, and we don't have enough kind of those mid-size firms today to really kind of set the market. And then also there's a whole generation of investors who maybe started around the time when we started too, learn just how to do deals, and we're incentivized to do deals without thinking about all the portfolio construction if they're the right partner. It was just about selling.
Yep. There's a lot more calculus that goes into hey, I want to spend time to get to know, understand better, or I want to go ahead and make an investment. And some of those bad habits that built up a decade ago are equally a function of an interest rate environment that was much friendlier for folks in our asset class relative to what we're sitting in right now, albeit they are low relative to historic periods. But I want to kind of jump into the realm of supply chain, right? Mm-hmm. You are in the early innings of plotting out your firm. Yeah. But let's say the firm's live, we're chatting, you have $10 million Series A check to write today.
Yeah.
What subject matter in supply chain would you be looking to invest in? Why would that be interesting? What's kind of swirling around your head when you think about this world?
Wow, that's a great question. There are a couple areas that I still find fascinating that are still big problems that are going to continue to become big problems, and doesn't mean it's going to be any easier. But I think the first that always comes to mind is just like how wasteful we are as a country. We're good at consumption, but like we're kind of wasteful as well. And so how to actually fix reverse logistics so things can actually be bought and sold. That's still one that like I was chasing and looking for it. Back when I was at Prologis, I was looking for it at Great Point, and still something today. I'm like, that's a huge problem that needs to be solved. The question there is like, even if you've made investments in areas, and I think this is something that a misconception that VCs have, and people who know VCs also probably have as well, is just because a deal or area didn't work at one point of time doesn't mean that it won't work in a future point of time. And the reason I say that is we have like real shifts in technology.
Yeah.
And so it's like looking at how many knowledge worker kind of like research tools didn't work in 2010, 2014, 2016. And now with generative AI, there's something really there now as an opportunity. And so that's one that for reverse logistics, I know we've had some that have tried to do the best they could with where technology is. That's one at the top of my list. The other is around, I think, labor within warehousing. That's just my days at Prologis. Like, how do we actually be able to leverage our labor in a better way? Not just through cobots, but like also dynamically with data through the ups and downs of just consumption and activity. I think that's one thing that would be utilized in all markets. Yeah, those are probably the main two. I mean, there's a number of other, like, I'm curious if you were a Series A investor. I know you're a seed investor, but like if you were a Series A, what would you look at now?
I think
you see, I'm a podcast host too. I know.
Yeah, I totally see what you've done there. The interesting thing about being a pre-seed seed investor versus an A investor is our time horizons may not be materially different. We're still looking like forward, let's call it 15, 20 years, because it'll take us about a decade to build something super valuable. And it takes a few more years after that to figure out, hey, like, how does one realize this investment? So there still needs to be this relevant market at that point. And so one might need to look ahead a bit more than one realizes. But I also think for people who don't understand venture deeply, they think we're looking at this crystal ball that's like 30 to 50 years ahead. It's like, no, there's actually like there's a practicality element that this could be a real thing that is valued in broader industry. And so some of the things that if I were a Series A investor today thinking about, I'm going to kind of lean in on your labor point, but I'm actually going to apply it into the realm of manufacturing. So the first area that we define is the industrial, like the true industrial landscape and supply chain that we affectionately refer to it internally as factories, farms, and facilities. And when we actually jumped on here, we're just catching up. We're talking about, hey, there's a new administration in the U.S. and we are at a time where geopolitical tensions are running high.
Yes.
And there is this question as to, are we kind of disconnecting these nodes that we have made during this hyperphase of globalization? And it's hard to argue against that because nationalist sentiment is so high and we are becoming a bit more isolationist. And when I say us, it's the US, but it's every developed nation. Absolutely. And I'd say developing nations are probably a bit better than we are in this regard. But if we are going to reindustrialize, which is what the intent is across many developed countries, we need to think about labor. And we need to think about the interplay of labor and automation. If we're to bring all of this back and try to put humans at it, frankly, we don't have that population. And even if we do, the thing we've seen through COVID is people don't want to do some of these jobs. They say, hey, I don't necessarily have good work, but they don't want to do, a lot of this frontline work. And it's hard. You can't necessarily blame them. Yeah. This is tough work, long hours, odd hours of the day. And it's very physically demanding and taxing. So what we're thinking about, and I think some of this is very much prime for Series A investment, is what does that new world of industry look like if it needs to be automated? Which segments? And I think as people are to kind of peel back the layers, they'll realize, oh, machine shops, those are the things that they're dirty, maybe even considered dull and boring. It's the backbone of the U.S. manufacturing economy. Mm-hmm. Everything gets machined in some way, shape, or form. How do we supercharge that industry? Yeah, that's something that I believe is very Series A investable, but equally there's a lot of opportunity left for folks like me who are sitting at the early days. I think the energy transition also, absolutely, maybe people have been scared off, but we need an answer to this, and maybe sharpening the pencil a little bit and realizing there's many energy sources, and understanding like something like hydrogen's better for industry. electrification is great for a more consumer or short distance application. There are a lot of companies that have been seeded the last 3, 4, 5 years, and they really need that Series A support.
Yeah, I love that. Those are definitely areas that we should look to invest in more, but we need the right investors as well that are willing to, like, I'm actually kind of pushing back on, like, do you need to know the space up and down? No. But should you have a perspective on where it's going? And I think Series A should lock into, what are you providing value on? Now, for me, what I've been able to do the last decade of my career is I've never had Benchmark or Sequoia on my email address. I've tried to misspell it and it still doesn't work. I'm joking. That's a joke. But I've never had that. So what that's really created in me is, there was a point when it was so competitive to get deals and term sheets in. It's like nobody was accepting my term sheet. Like nobody was going to let me, like, I wasn't going to give out a term sheet until I talked to some customers, and nobody was going to just give me customers because they were like, hey, we got some other people we've already shared the customer list with. So it's really created something in me to be like, all right, cool. I'm going to figure out who your ICP is extremely fast. And given I've just been a social butterfly my entire life, and I've went to some schools where people like actually work in industry, I'm going to introduce you to at least 2 or 3 of your potential customers or partners. And so that's really been the muscle for me, and where I feel like Series A is to drive. How do you drive revenue as an investor? How do you help that process? And so whatever your thing is a Series A, that's what you need to do. It also makes me think of the other thing I've kind of been debating in my head on is, and would love your thoughts, is for these vertical software, verticalized kind of venture-backed plays, do you really need somebody who knows the industry that well or not? Like, I used to have this thesis of like, all right, it could be kind of one of 2, like, prototypes, maybe 3, but it was like somebody who grew up in the industry, or somebody who was like this kind of like bridge, who was like, went to MIT, but parents owned like a trucking company or something like that.
Yeah.
But when I look at some of the most outlier industry, like investments in our industry, that's not always the case. Where are you on that now? Because you still sit in the space a lot more.
So we get asked a lot as to, like, why did you pick pre-seed seed? Like when we go out fundraising, right? Like, why are you at pre-seed seed, not a somewhere later stage? And our belief is our industry vein, understanding our networks and relationships are most impactful at this embryonic stage where, like, it's the company's highly malleable. Right? It's looking for inputs to be able to shape itself. How does it hire? How is it building product? In what order do features get built? And then how do you set up an early go-to-market capability? I think once you're bringing something to a Series A investor, a lot of these things are hardened enough where there's a core. Now the question is, what is the next set of features you add on where you can start to show you can expand TAM or double down on TAM even further? Yeah. And it becomes more a function of scaling. So that's where your point on, hey, like, how can you introduce customers to really help drive that goal of scaling? I think is hyper important for a Series A investor. We happen to bring that, and that's part of why we believe we have the right to exist. We can bring that as early as a pre-seed in the realm of, or context of, just have a chat for customer discovery, right? That's our unfair advantage as an investor. But one of the things that oftentimes will happen is we'll have Series A investors who reach out and say, hey, I try to reach out to so-and-so at XYZ company. I think I'm really intrigued by what they're building, but I haven't heard back. I've tried 3-4 times. The first thing I go is, well, why did you just ask for a warm intro? I said, 2, the archetype of a Dynamo founder is they are suckers for customer introductions. And the way, in general, to all Series A investors listening here, the way to the hearts of our CEOs generally is, hey, could we chat? I'd love to learn more about what you do. Here are a few customers in our network that, I'd be happy to connect you to. And starting to demonstrate a bit of that understanding and value earlier on is powerful. And you know what? If we end up in a competitive deal, LPs go, how do you win? Because we've only ever lost one deal on terms to a fund that was 4 to 5 times our size. So we ain't gonna win on terms. What we do is we say we'll just accelerate the value add. We'll go ahead and we'll make those customer introductions. We'll somewhere on our Friday calls with our portfolio founders, we'll let it slip. And we've realized that founders will reach out directly to these companies and say, like, you got to take the check, guy, gal. It'll change your life.
I love that.
But there's a bit of maybe that pre-seed seed hustle Series A investors might reflect on and potentially adopt.
Yeah, we're not growth investors. I don't know why we're just sitting back and we're like, yeah, let me just do Rule of 40 one more time. No, like it's actually there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of risk. And that's why I think it's a huge opportunity. Cool. I'm sorry, I've sidetracked your podcast.
I'm gonna go ahead and bring us home here.
Cool.
And so I like to finish with something I call rapid fire. I'm going to make a phrase statement. I want your 20-second reaction to it. You ready?
All right, cool.
First up, President Trump trying to take control of the Panama Canal.
No comment.
The future of electrification in the U.S.
We have a lot of work to do.
Some real talk here. The best ecosystems to build a supply chain startup in.
Ooh. I would say LA, Chattanooga, still SF for anything. And there's one more. What would I say? I'll stay with those 3. I know I'm missing something, but I'll stay with those 3.
Amazing. Well, with that, Ernest, we covered a lot of ground. I think this episode shed some light on maybe some of the unknown things that our audience might be facing or asking about the underbelly of venture. So I think they got a peek into that. But it was great to have you back on, dude.
It was a pleasure. I want to do it more, man.
We'll make it happen. Cheers.
All right, cheers.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.